Hey guys. Oh, that was weird doing that with my left hand. Hey guys. So today I am starting some video requests that I've had for a little while. Apologize for that. You may notice that in this video and next week's video I look exactly the same. That's because I'm filming multiple videos at once. Don't come for me. Today I'm doing a request that I got from Elaine Mentz. Thank you so much for the request, Elaine. And it is the story of the Bell Witch. Now, if you live in America, and I would specifically say Southern America, not South America, the Southern US. If you live in the Southern US, you've probably heard of the Bell Witch. If you live in the US, you've probably heard of the Bell Witch. Outside, I don't know how far the legend has traveled over the centuries, but it, especially here in Tennessee, is like the legend. It's the haunted place to go in Tennessee. I've never been to the Bell Witch Cave. I had planned a trip there years ago, and then they had like monsoon like weather down there and the cave got flooded the weekend I was supposed to go, which I've always found very interesting because my grandmother, also named Elaine, weird enough, my grandmother Elaine always had a huge fear of the Bell Witch. Oh, this is so weird that I'm saying this now. I'm just realizing something. I'll get to that in a second. She always warned me never to go to the Bell Witch Cave. Because supposedly the legend is that the Bell Witch will follow you if you carry anything home. Now, they supposedly, when you leave the cave, will check your shoes for rocks and stuff, and people who have taken rocks with them from the cave, like as a souvenir, have driven back to the location to return the rocks because they say that weird shit has happened to them, basically. Another interesting fact my grandmother always told me growing up was that the Bell Witch book, which I will go over, which is the main source of the folklore, basically, she always told me that she had a copy of the book, my parents had a copy of the book, so many people that she know have had a copy of the book, and they've always lost it. And the urban legend about that, I guess, is that you can't keep a copy of the book. If you get the book, you will lose it. And now I'm just realizing that I bought the book not long ago from McKay's here in Nashville, and I have no idea where it's at. So that's weird. I'll have to go looking for that and see if I maybe just misplaced it. But onto the story. I know I ramble. Come at me in the comments. Let me know how much you hate my fucking rambling. Let me know how much you hate me. You know I love hate comments. Let's get going. Now, I'm getting better at looking at the lens, but if I'm looking off to the side, I'm trying to keep my notes next to the camera so that I'm not staring down at my notes. So, as I stated, the Bell Witch is a legend from Southern American folklore, which is based around the Bell family, who was located near Adams, Tennessee. John Bell Sr., who was a farmer, lived with his family there, and between the years of 1817 and 1821, supposedly the family came under attack from an entity known now as the Bell Witch. Now, they never saw this entity, however, it supposedly was able to speak, affect the physical environment, and shapeshift, which I don't know how it would shapeshift if it was invisible. That was weird. Now, they never saw the entity from what I've read, but it was able to speak to them very clearly from the stories that I'll tell, and affect its physical environment around it. It was sort of a poltergeist. Now, in 1894, the book by Martin V. Ingram, whose full name is Martin Van Buren Ingram, so if you live in Tennessee, you may recognize both the names Van Buren, because we have a Van Buren County, and Ingram. He was a newspaper editor, and in that year, he published his book, which was called Authenticated History of the Bell Witch. And again, this is where we get most of the folklore from. This is the one solid place where the entire consolidated story is. It's widely regarded as the first full-length record of the legend and the primary source. Now, in modern times, a lot of people have suspected that it is basically a fraud. Just a scary story that was put together, maybe even a story that was based off of a little bit of fact and got twisted over the years, but it's come under wide criticism, obviously, because it's about a ghost. Now, in the book, Ingram states that the poltergeist went by the name of Kate, after the entity at one point claimed to be old Kate Batts' witch, Kate Batts being the full name. And it continued to respond favorably to that name. Now, the physical activity of the witch centered mainly on the Bell's youngest daughter, Betsy, and her father, John Bell Sr. Now, I don't know the reason behind this, and I haven't really been able to find the reason behind this other than maybe supposedly through the family line, Kate Batts was related to maybe this gardener gentleman that I'm about to tell you about. Kate got really upset when Betsy became engaged to a local boy named Joshua Gardner. The haunting began sometime in 1817 when John Bell witnessed the apparition of a strange creature resembling a dog. He fired at the animal, but it disappeared. I don't know why he was shooting at it, but whatever. It was the 1800s.
But I have hunted werewolves. I shot one once, but by the time I got to it, it had turned back into my neighbor's dog.
John's son Drew Bell approached an unknown bird perched on a fence that flew off and was of extraordinary size, according to Drew. The daughter Betsy observed a girl in a green dress swinging from the limb of an oak tree. Dean, who was a slave of the Bell family, reported being followed by a large black dog on evenings that he visited his wife. After this, activity sort of moved into the house. The Bell family started hearing knocking heard along the doors and the walls of the home. And they heard sounds of gnawing on their beds. They also heard sounds of invisible dogs fighting, meaning they couldn't find any dogs or see any dogs, but they heard it. They heard dogs just going at each other. And they heard chains along the floor. Now, at about this time, John Bell Sr. began experiencing paralysis in his mouth. The haunting began to grow more intense as sheets were pulled from the beds when the children slept. Soon the entity pulled hair and scratched the children, with particular emphasis on Betsy, the youngest daughter that we spoke of, who was slapped, pinched, and stuck with pins. Now, the Bells turned to a family friend named James Johnston for help. Johnston came to stay at the Bell home, and he said that he was awoken that very night by the same entity. The next morning, he told John Bell that it was a spirit just like in the Bible. Now, word of this haunting began to spread far and wide, and people began supposedly traveling great distances to come and visit this witch. Now, when people would come to visit, they would ask out loud to the spirit, who are you and what do you want? And supposedly the spirit would answer feebly, I am a spirit. I was once very happy but have been disturbed. Now, supposedly the spirit on different occasions elaborated this. They gave a few different explanations as to why they were disturbed. One that has stuck out to most people being that there was a disturbance of a Native American burial mound located on the property, which sent Drew Bell and a friend Bennett Porter on an unproductive search for buried treasure. Now, John Johnston, a son of the fellow James Johnston who had stayed at the home, devised a test for the witch. And he thought of something no one else in the home would know. He asked aloud what his Dutch step-grandmother in North Carolina would say to the slaves if she thought that they did something wrong. And supposedly the witch replied with his grandmother's accent, "Hut tut, what has happened now?" And this was supposedly what his grandmother would say. On another account, an Englishman stopped to visit and offered to investigate. And when he came in and mentioned his family overseas, the witch started to mimic his English parents. And supposedly the witch could do things miles and miles away, because the next morning after this Englishman was staying at the home, his parents back in England were awoken hearing his voice. But he was over here in the US in Tennessee at the time. The Englishman quickly left that morning and later wrote to the Bell family that the entity had visited his family, and he apologized for being a skeptic. Now, sometimes the spirit wasn't mean, it was very nice, especially towards Lucy, John Bell's wife. The witch supposedly would give Lucy fresh fruit and sing hymns to her, and showed their son, John Bell Jr., a measure of respect. Now, the witch would refer to John Bell Sr. as Old Jack and claimed on many different occasions that she intended to kill him. Now, I believe the year that this happened was 1820. John Bell Sr. was actually killed. Now, his death was supposedly by poison, so this leads most to wonder, you know, was he poisoned by someone else? Maybe a disgruntled neighbor, an ex-friend, some sort of enemy or something. But people like to use this and claim that this is the one haunting, the only haunting in recorded history that led to the death of a human being. However, we don't know that that's obviously what happened. Now, after he was poisoned, and I believe this was supposedly at his funeral, the witch interrupted the mourners by singing drinking songs. So she was like really cheerful and happy about this. Now, in 1821, as a result of her father's death and everything the witch had said about Betsy being engaged to Joshua Gardner, she called off her engagement. Because of this, the entity told the family that it was going to leave, but it would return 7 years later in 1828. Supposedly, the witch did return on time to Lucy and her sons Richard and Joel with similar activities as before, but they chose not to encourage it, and the witch appeared to leave again. Now, this is widely debated, but supposedly the legend spread so far that it reached Andrew Jackson, who was a general at the time. Now, in the book, there's a letter from a Thomas L. Yancey, who was an attorney in Clarksville, Tennessee, dated January of 1894. Yancey explained that his grandfather, Whitmell Fort, was a witness during the phenomena at the Bell homestead, and Fort had related the story of Jackson's visit, which was undated at the time of the letter. Now, supposedly the Bell home was short of supplies because they had so many visitors coming to check out the witch. So Jackson came with a wagon full of men and full of supplies. However, when they got near the home, the wagon stopped and appeared to get stuck in its position despite all the efforts of the men to free the wagon. Apparently, Andrew Jackson exclaimed, "By the eternal boys, it is the witch." A metallic voice was heard in the vegetation. It said, "All right, General, let the wagon move on. I will see you again tonight." The horses began moving again. They got the wagon to the home and stayed the night. Now, supposedly among the Jackson party was a witch layer who boasted of his supernatural exploits. So this was someone who supposedly was an expert in basically ghosts and witches and all that. Now, Andrew Jackson apparently got sick of this guy just boasting about himself and talking about how much he knew about ghosts and spirits and all that, and supposedly was quoted to have said, "By the Eternals, I do wish the thing would come because I want to see him run." So he wanted something to happen to like fuck with this guy basically. Now, supposedly after this, the entity arrived and told the witch layer to shoot her, and the man's gun would not fire. The witch countered, "I'll teach you a lesson," and appeared to beat the man and led him out the door by his nose. Jackson exclaimed his favorite phrase, "By the eternal boys, I never saw so much fun in all my life. This beats fighting the British." The witch told Jackson she would uncover another rascal the next night. That morning, Jackson's men chose to leave as they were apprehensive as to who was next. Now, as I stated before, this is widely disputed. A paranormal investigator by the name of Benjamin Radford, as well as Brian Dunning, conclude that there's no evidence that Jackson ever visited the Bell home. During the years in question, Jackson's movements were very well documented, and there's no history or writings whatsoever that he even had knowledge of this haunting happening. Now, the folklore of the Bell Witch is so strong, especially around Tennessee, that supposedly the son of Sarah Elizabeth Bell, who was an attorney by the name of Charles Willett, was the first editor of the Nashville Tennessean newspaper. In the early 1900s, I believe it was like around the 1920s, let me see, around 1910 or so, he would accompany his sweetheart, Miss Jerry Cullum Gardner, for ice cream in Clarksville and dinner at Richardson's restaurant on the return home. So this is a Bell and a Gardner again. And because of the legend of the Bell Witch and the legend of these two families never marrying, because of the entity Kate not wanting them to, this couple never married. It was just like a long history, urban legend within their families that they should never marry. Not them specifically, but the two families should never marry, so they never did. Now, to this day, the entity is still often blamed for unexplainable manifestations that occur near the Bell farm. The faint sounds of people talking and children playing can sometimes be heard in the area, and it's not uncommon to see candle lights dance through the dark fields late at night. Photography supposedly is really hard to take there. Some pictures in the area show mist or orbs of light. Others show human-like figures that were not present when taken. And I've heard some people say that they can't even develop their photos. Now, this was back in the time of like disposable cameras and actual film photos, but they wouldn't develop. As I stated before, I've never been to the Bell Witch Cave, and I had planned on going there. And I had a friend who knew the people who own it now. And I had spoken to the woman, this is just my own personal story that she told me. I had spoken to the woman who owned it, told her I was a friend of a friend. And so she was going to hook me and some friends up with a tour, like at a discounted rate. And I remember she had said she was going to call her homeowner's insurance and ask if it would cover other people staying in the home, because if so, she was going to let us stay overnight in the farmhouse. Now, she flat out told me it was not the original farmhouse. It was just on the same land and everything, and that weird stuff would supposedly happen all the time there. And this was something that she offered to me. It wasn't something that I asked about, nothing like that. Like, she flat out offered, I'll let you guys stay the night, whatever. Now, it could have been a whole ruse where she was, you know, gonna have some weird noises happening completely. But it never came through. Like, she called her insurance and they said, no, we won't cover if anything happens. And she said she couldn't risk us being in the home overnight if something happened to us, which was weird, which was creepy, basically. Now, she had known that supposedly some bad weather was coming, and it did, and it flooded the cave, so they had to wait for it to drain out, and we never ended up going. But I remember her telling me that, now that I think about it, I feel like she was letting us go for really cheap because we knew like a family friend of hers or something. So this isn't like her getting, I mean, she was losing money on us basically, because she was saving us a spot where she would have had other people come for full price. And she was telling me all these weird things about the cave that they had gotten. She said that they would stick tape recorders back there sometimes and just leave it for a few hours and come back, and they would get a woman talking on it. They would hear like children laughing, which is what's still reported, which is what I spoke about earlier. Some weird like scratching noises or moaning noises in the cave. And now she was the first to admit that, you know, when you're in a cave like that, you know, wind can come through or weather can come through, and the cave can sort of play tricks on your ear. And she said that, you know, there was a lot of stuff like that where they would completely dismiss it. If it sounded like some weird whispering or something like that, they just left it up to, that's probably just wind or something like that. But she said that they caught some pretty cool stuff in there, or they would like, her and her husband would take turns having to go in there to do stuff, because when they would go in there, stuff would happen to them, or they would hear someone talking to them, or they would feel this presence there. So it was pretty interesting hearing the owner tell me this stuff, knowing she wasn't trying to sell me on coming out there. I was already coming out there. She was already giving me a major discount, and she was just like selling me on the idea of it. So that was pretty interesting. That's the only real experience I have. Another time recently, some friends and I were thrift shopping, I believe I think it was like out in Franklin area or Fairview area, something like that. And we were at a vintage store where there was some art hanging, like prints hanging on the wall for sale. And some of them were about the Bell Witch. They were all like spooky things, I believe, or like Tennessee based things. And some of them were about the Bell Witch, and they were really cool. And when we asked the man up front about them, he said that he had done them and that he was a direct descendant, supposedly, of John Bell. So of course we talked to him for like an hour, and that was very interesting. And he was just telling us about his family history and how he is still tied to us. I think his last name was Bell too, or something like that, or maybe like his grandmother's last name was Bell. I don't know, but that was really interesting to meet someone of the family line. So yeah, that's my story on the Bell Witch. I hope this was to your enjoyment. If you guys did enjoy this, please give me a thumbs up below. If you guys want to hear more spooky stories, true crime stories, or anything else, comment suggestions below or subscribe to see more. I upload new videos every Wednesday. And other than that, I will see you guys next week. Bye.